All right. Hi, and welcome everybody to this special episode of Error Correcting Erik. Today, you can already see we are with 3 people instead of 2. Yeah. And we have something very special planned. We are not going to discuss a chapter. We're going to do an intermission episode in which we will discuss the most profound insights so far. For me, we've selected 5 out of the first 13 chapters. And we have a special guest on the show. We have Bart, who is a fellow Deutschian and also a friend of the show. Bart has been a sparring partner for us, has helped us before, and he mainly contributed to our understanding on the chapter on the Infinity Hotel and the puppy problem. So before we dive in, Bart, really happy to have you on the show.
Yeah.
Can you explain a bit who you are, what the book is for you, and what's your stance on Deutsche philosophy?
Yeah, okay. So I like to start with a lot what you guys are doing with the podcast, so I'm happy to be here. Yes, I'm a Deutschen as well. I discovered the book in 2019, I think. Friend recommended it to me. I didn't came via the Sam Harris route, but just a friend gave me the book and said, you need to read this. This is an awesome book. So I started reading it again, trying to understand what the ideas were, getting into the podcasts that are being put out around the book, and gradually, really got absorbed by the book. And there's 2 things that really stand out. There's the epistemology part. So by education, I'm an engineer in physics, so I was kind of a physics nerd, but I never asked myself questions about epistemology, like
Right.
what is knowledge, what is scientific knowledge, how can it grow? None of those questions ever arose. And the book is all about knowledge, about papier and epistemology. So that was the first real aha erlebnis. And then the second one is Everettian quantum mechanics. So I studied physics, as I said, and I studied quantum mechanics, and I really remember myself sitting in those lectures, like we're talking 25 years ago already, and I still vividly remember asking myself these questions but what is really going on there?
Yeah.
Quantum mechanics is about predicting, about calculation of predictions, and the only question I had in my mind was but why and how? And I never got an answer 25 years ago. But reading, and this is more Fabric of Reality. So the second chapter there, the chapter Shadows, and that was the second experience of discovering that there are answers to those questions.
Yeah.
And those answers come from Everettian quantum mechanics. And so those are the 2 things. And then a lot of things came along, like the morality, the aesthetics, everything. So. But that got me into Deutsch.
Okay.
And that keeps me into Deutsch still today, and still looking for more insights and discussions, debates with you, Thomas, a lot. Very enjoyable. So that's how I got here.
Cool. Very nice. We specifically have selected one profound insight, which is about quantum mechanics. So very interesting to have that discussion with you. A lot of people, when I recommend the podcast to friends and family, they ask, well, what is the book really about? And you can talk about epistemology, you can talk a lot of things. How would you describe it in just a few sentences? What is the book for you?
Yeah, so I think the central topic or sentence is progress. Ideas that allow for progress, be it in physics, be it in morality, be it in aesthetics, be it in evolution, but the central theme is what are the ideas that allow for progress, that allow for advancements versus those ideas that inhibit or prevent progress.
Right. Yeah.
And just Deutsch explodes on that theme and gives examples, topic after topic, where he applies these simple questions is this an idea that allows for progress, or is it an idea that thwarts or prevents progress?
Interesting. Okay. Would you say the book is about science? Is it about moral philosophy? If there is one thing, how you would box this, what would it be?
Yeah, I think the other way of looking at it is about 4 big topics. It's about epistemology, it's about quantum mechanics, evolution and computation. So that are the content topics. But for each of those four, the main theme is progress.
Yeah.
Like, what are the good ideas and how do we distinguish the good ones from the bad ones? And when we have the good ones, how can we advance? How can we improve those good ideas even more? So there's really four topics in my mind and one central question: how does progress work?
Yeah, that reminded me kind of something that Naval like mentioned, like how he interprets. So I think in the podcast with Arjun, where he's like asked like, so what has it done for you in your daily life? And Naval says, well, it's actually it's increased my ability to detect bullshit. So he's like, yeah, it's all great and all these things and these ideas, and you get these mental, like I call them like mental vertigo, where you just go like all of a sudden. That makes sense. Like, where was that all my life? Or why, like, I didn't see that part of the equation, and things come into play, like the morality aspect that you say, where, it brings it all together, because morality should not be it shouldn't be taken away from reality. It is a part of it. And I think a lot of times people like to think it's an abstract, it is abstract, right? But it's not abstract to our world.
Yeah.
It's not alien to our world. It is very much a part of our world, and I think that's what Deutsch did for me as well. On top of the ability to just call out, like I know quicker what not to read now.
Okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I can read something for a little bit, and I'm like, oh, this is
not what I'm looking for. Yeah.
Or clearly irrational or something.
Yeah.
Like the bullshit sensor is just way more tuned, I guess. Yeah.
You do the kind of check of like, is it in line with best theories, and if not, then you're quicker to say, okay, this is not the path to pursue.
Right.
I'm just thinking here about we'll get into that, I guess, but artificial intelligence. The first test I'm doing is, does it take into account, for example, computational universality?
Right.
If already you have a book and you can search on the index or on internet, if it doesn't cover those things, and if it like treats the brain as a purely mechanical thing with a finite repertoire, then I know already, okay, there's it's ignoring computational universality.
Right.
And so then you can more easily say to leave that book on the side.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. Before we dive into the most profound insight, maybe it's interesting to discuss, how did you two guys meet and how did you get to talk?
So funny enough, I recently asked Logan, just in case you may be listening or watching at some point. So I don't know. I asked this to Logan. I was like, hey, how did you find me, or I found you? And none of us remember.
Yeah.
But I know that I was in the econ chat that Logan, I think, started. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And he mentioned that I was going to be added to that group, and I'm a Belgian guy, and he said, well, there's another Belgian guy as well in that same Telegram group.
Okay.
So and I think we reached out to each other at some point. And said, hey, let's get on a call, on a Teams call, Google Meets, whatever it was. And then I think a couple of weeks later, we had a drink together. And then, there aren't many of us, right? In Belgium, in the small country, it's like being the only, I don't know, it's like being the only Christian. If you find the other Christian in an otherwise non-Christian country, you'd want to talk to that person.
Yeah.
That's actually a very funny story, because like we live 10 kilometers apart, but it's thanks to this guy, our friend US, Logan, who lives in Philadelphia, who connected the two of us.
Yeah.
Which was,
he's like the Nick Fury. It was like Nick Fury from
from the Avengers, who brings everybody together.
I think they did a post recently about Logan, comparing him to the Nick Fury of the Deutschens, if you will.
Oh, funny. Yeah, it is true that we actually live very close to each other. Yeah, and we learned today that your wife is actually an ex-colleague. Yeah, we used to work in the same company, which is funny to see how things go and how small the world is. Yeah. Anything else that we want to discuss before we dive into the most profound insights?
I mean, I'm good to dive in. I think maybe just a quick kind of how you got into it as well, because I think you're the last one of us to,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
kind of join the cult, if you will.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Well, the book was recommended, of course, by you.
Yeah.
We go way back. We met in high school, and I think we often had discussions at the bar about reality and science and so on, and that's a lot of the topics that are discussed there.
Yeah.
And as we just had a conversation with Bart, as I explained to him, you had been telling me to read that book for a really long time.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I'll read it, Thomas, I'll read it, whatever. We already had discussions on the subjects before when we had dinner or at the bar.
Right.
And then one day he just bought it for me for my birthday, and then I felt obligated to read it. I started it, and it was really interesting.
Yeah.
And I kept on reading it, and then the idea somewhere along came to have this podcast and to pour it in that format where I read a chapter, I discuss my findings, and then Thomas brings his expertise on top.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now here we are.
Here we are, yeah. And to me, it's also a nice little bit of I think a legacy I want to have for my son, is where he can hear his dad talking for even more more time on demand, if you will, at some point. Yeah.
But it's cool the way you do it, because I've given the book to many of my friends.
Yeah.
With actually very little result, but the way you engage with it and really put the work in and keep on going is really nice.
I had to threaten him also to start a podcast about it, so to get him a little bit enticed. So maybe you should be doing that as well to your friends.
Yeah, indeed. But the hardest thing is just start.
Exactly.
Just start on the book. Just read the first page.
Exactly.
Just record an episode, and then once you have that first ball rolling, it just keeps going.
Yeah.
Like I remember when first reading, you have like you're smelling that there's something in there.
Right.
You don't understand the thing right away.
Yeah.
But it's like the thing that I want to know more, I want to understand this better. There is something here to discover and to discover more of. And that's what keeps you going. And I think there's two ways. Either you drop the book after half an hour, or the book takes you and grips you and really doesn't let you go.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's get into it.
Absolutely. So for today, we have prepared 6 profound insights. There are a lot of these very interesting topics in the books, but I think if we would discuss them all, we would be here for 10 hours. So we have chosen 6 profound insights. We've combined 2, so we have 5 topics to talk about, the most important profound insights for me from the first 13 chapters. All right. So the very first one is from the first chapter. It is the reach of explanations and the power of knowledge, and specifically explanatory knowledge. And there are a couple of elements in the profound insight. The first one, that it is not just about predicting outcomes. We don't just use knowledge and science to predict future events. No, we use it to provide a real understanding in how the world and how the universe works. And then David Deutsch goes on, he explains a bit about what is a good explanation, a bad explanation. I think this is one of the first important concepts. So just a quick recap. A good explanation is easy to verify and hard to vary.
Is it easy to verify? Is that what it says?
I think so,
Hard to vary.
It's hard to vary.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily easy to verify.
I think he says more than that. It's hard to vary.
Yeah.
Criticizable, of course, but easy to verify, I can't
that doesn't
remember.
ring true to me either.
Maybe that's a layer that I added my own spin on it. Yeah. The cool example that I always like to give, because it's an easy example that everybody understands, even if you're not into this subject, it's the sun and the moon. Yeah. So people say, oh, the sun rises every morning and then it sets in the evening, and you can ask why. And a bad explanation is, it's the sun god Ra or whatever.
Right.
But that is easy to vary, because you can change its god or it's a firefly in the sky by anything else, and then the explanation would still hold.
Right.
So that's a first critical concept, an example of a bad explanation. Mm-hmm. A good explanation is, well, the sun doesn't really rise, nor does it set. Yeah. The Earth orbits the sun, the Earth rotates on its axis, and it's especially the last part that gives the day and night cycle, and that gives like the perception of the sun rising and setting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what this is related to is that even more empirical analysis, looking at how the sun rises and sets every single day, and analyzing it, will not get you closer to really understanding what's going on. And that for me is a first important insight. So the source of that knowledge is come from, and David describes it as conjecture. It is the ID first, and then you have the criticism, you have the empirical analysis, but not the other way around.
Yeah, it's explanation first, and then you can hope to maybe test an explanation down the line.
Yeah.
Maybe to add there as well, what I found kind of eye-opening was the example of Newtonian and Einsteinian physics, where let's say for thousands of years, and I forget, don't quote me on the amount of actual times the Earth went around the sun here, but let's say for 500, 600 years, thousands of years, everybody thought Newtonian mechanics, was like God and Almighty. It was so accurate. Everybody thought, let's pack up our bags. This is over here. And all of a sudden, here comes Einstein. So I think part of like the empiricists as well, right, where they have more confidence, the more they test something, which means like the more you test something, the more your results come out the way that you quote unquote expected them to. The more sure, right, whatever that means, you are of your theory. Now, in contrast, let's say on day 1000, you're more and more sure of your theory, and then day 1001 comes along, and there's Einstein who basically shatters the whole thing. So how do you square those two things, right? And that to me was really profound. Is like, of course, like how how does that even work? How can you be more and more sure of something when there's new knowledge? The thing kind of gets overwritten, essentially, right? And speaking about maybe how I was also in this journey, that's kind of one of the things that helped me see through that kind of barrier, the anti-rational barrier there.
Yeah.
I remember we were talking about that as well, and I was like, hey, the sun goes up and down, and like, how do you know that? And I think one of your first responses was, well, because it's always been doing that.
Yeah, and we see it.
Yeah,
we observe it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, but
yeah,
not really, Erik.
That's not a good explanation. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That same example is also interesting, like Newton and Einstein, to illustrate the difference between the predictive part of an explanation or of a theory and the explanatory part. Because like on the predictive side, both theories are roughly the same. Like here on Earth, if we do some tests with cars and balls and rockets, predictions will be roughly the same. They're still different, but they're quite close to each other.
Right.
But the explanatory part of the theory of Einstein versus the one of Newton is completely different. Like Einstein says gravity is caused by space-time curvature, and Newton explains gravity by masses and forces. And so that's like completely different, even if the predictions are very close to each other, very similar in our day-to-day settings.
So what were you before Deutschen?
I said I was a science nerd, but definitely I believed in the authority of
epistemologically
science.
speaking, I mean, like, what was your philosophy?
I believed in the authority of science. Like if science concludes it, if experiments prove it, then it's true. That was my, and I went maybe a bit far in that, but it's to the sense or to the extent that you believe those things, and so not aware of any other type of epistemology that could explain the same thing.
Right.
I was, how do you call it, scientific authoritarianism or something like that.
And empiricism as well to a certain degree, or
the evidence proves theories.
And then there comes the dinosaur example, right? Like the scene in terms of the unseen that Deutsch always says.
And the star example.
What is the star example?
Well, so the idea that the stars emit light, and the light is caused by nuclear fusion, but nobody has ever seen the inside of a star.
Yeah.
So we explain the light by saying there's nuclear fusion going on in the inside, but nobody has seen the inside of a star.
Yeah. And I think he means the same as the dinosaur. Nobody's ever directly seen a dinosaur, but there's abundance of evidence there because we have the fossils and so on.
Yeah, but even the fossils aren't actually dinosaurs. They're not the bones anymore. So even the bones, like you need to have a bone theory first before you can even get to dinosaurs.
I see.
So there's all these unseen layers in between that you need. And the same goes for evolution, right? Darwinian evolution as well. Like, and I think they call it more like a science project or something because you can't test it.
A program, yeah.
Program
Popper called it a program.
A program, yeah, because it's untestable, but it's such a good explanation that it kind of, you would expect it to have reach as well, that other planets where life would emerge, that would also be through an evolutionary process, basically. Yeah. Anyway, maybe we're going a bit tangential now, but that's okay.
Yeah. Like Deutsch also says that an explanation explains the seen, the empiricist stuff, the visual things, in terms of things unseen. So we explain fossils in terms of dinosaurs that we don't see.
Yeah.
We explain the light of the sun that we see in terms of the nuclear fusion that we don't see.
I see. Yeah.
And so the unseen stuff is the core part of an explanatory theory.
That's an interesting.
And the
take.
seen is, that's what you're actually trying to explain. But like the power is in the explanation, not in the observation.
But even the seen is not necessarily seen in the sense that it is like empirically observed, right? Because all observation is theory laden. So I think we're using a bit of a shorthand, obviously, which you have to. There's a meta language involved where we kind of know what we talk about, and I think that's what I love about Deutsch as well. He goes to these, was it like a Tuskies or Tarskis?
Tarskis,
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. Yeah, indeed, there's no such thing as a direct observation. Even you have to take those two steps in order to indeed get to what an explanation really is.
Meaning that any observation is influenced by how you experience it, how you interpret it, and so on.
Your epistemology, like let's say the software you have running, if you will, or whatever, that the memes that you have dictate how you will interpret something.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you're a religious person, for example, you see an event happening, you see, God's work at play, right?
Yeah.
If you're an empiricist, you see whatever empirically validated thing kind of come to light. So it's a different way of looking at cause and effect, I guess, as well.
Yeah. And that's what the objectivists, for example, have a very hard time believing. Like they think you directly observe things, whereas it's always intermediated by theory and by interpretation.
It's a part, I think he calls it, there's no such thing as reading the book of nature.
Right.
Yeah. Meaning that you cannot get the truth or the way it works by just observation without having the knowledge, the idea, the abstraction in between. And I think that's the layer in between that you're talking about.
Because otherwise, why didn't we, read Newtonian physics, 5,000 years ago?
Exactly.
Right. I think that was also a useful analogy or example for me to kind of come to that realization. Like, if it's so easy to read things from the data, right? I still have friends that are kind of, rational, data-driven people, they say, but then I'll ask them like, hey, how do you know? It's like, they'll say, well, the data says so. I'm like, but what does that mean, the data says so? Because you have to have an explanation of interpreting the data before you even can speak about, quote unquote, the data. I think it's like an empiricism mistake in a sense, but like applied on computation and logic in its academic sense. I mean logic.
Maybe a final reflection before we move to the second profound insight, because you have a scientific background. How does the scientific community, the academic community, look at this? Are they more on the empirical side first, or do they follow the theory of abstraction first?
It's very much still empiricist and also instrumentalist. Like that's really maybe even the bigger ideology in science. So they're connected, of course, because instrumentalism is the idea that the purpose of science is to generate predictions that you then can test via observation and compare. So it's a bit those two. So the aim of science is to come up with models, with calculations, with math that allows you to give predictions, and then you go out in the world and you observe things and you compare your prediction with what you observe. That's basically the main philosophy of science today. Well, and for the past, I don't know how many years. I mean, there's very little Popperian thinking in science. I don't know. well, apart from the Deutschen strand, but I don't know of any other
Okay.
where really you start from a problem, from theories that conflict, and you try to creatively guess how to resolve the conflict.
Yeah.
And you do measurements only when you compare two competing theories,
Yeah.
but the measurement is like way
Yeah.
or has a completely different role.
And what about theoretical physicists? Because as Einstein predicted black holes before they were ever observed, or they had the capability of measuring anything, so there the idea, the abstraction came first.
Yeah, Einstein is an interesting case, and indeed, like general relativity started from a kind of principle, like
Yeah.
even an explanation. It's the equivalence between gravity and acceleration, and then if you take that as a starting theory and you apply a bit of math, then you get this kind of or his field equations, his theory, and then you can, and those give you predictions which you then can test. So that's an example where, it started from a theory, from an idea to improve upon what Newton said. But I think, in theoretical physics, maybe there's a little bit more principled thinking or starting from theory.
I don't know. I think the black hole thing was a logical consequence of his explanation. The fact that he just didn't believe in himself, right? He rejected the existence of black holes because he just didn't believe it. Again, it's the argument from incredulity, right? Which, he's a human. We're all human. We're all kind of victims of that, irrationality or anti-rationality, if you will. I think the beauty about theoretical physics is that it should, or I think in essence is all conjecture and explanation, and only that. And then the engineers afterwards have to figure out how to build, multi-billion-dollar, facilities to then have the one, graviton or whatever disproven or proven or whatever the wind flows type of thing.
Cool.
Yeah. I'm not an expert, but like if you take string theory, you could say they start also from an explanation. Like they're saying the most fundamental, smallest thing in the universe is this kind of string. That's an explanation of some sorts. But then they have still a lot of way to go until they get to a theory, which then can be tested. Right. So, but that's starting from an abstraction, like what is the smallest thing, even below quarks and atoms.
Reductionism, right? Yeah. And I think Deutsch also calls out the flaws in reductionism, the flaws in holisticism. I don't know if that's the right word, or holistic. Holism, yeah. He calls out those flaws as well. And to me, that was also just, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves again, but that to me was like, oh, what?
Yeah.
Holistic, like we can't keep reducing maybe? Like, what does that even mean, reducing? You need an explanation for what reductions are before you can even speak about them. Anyway.
Interesting stuff. All right. Let's move on to our second most profound insight. It is from chapter 3, The Spark, where he talks a bit about the Enlightenment, the role of the Enlightenment, how important it was, because it was really a shift in culture, where before there were a lot of mechanisms and systems in play to prevent the growth of knowledge. Still are, yeah. But a important turning point was the Enlightenment.
Yes.
Yeah. And but we're not here to discuss about the history of the Enlightenment, but the profound insight for me from that chapter is that either is something prohibited by the laws of nature, or it is achievable. It is possible given the right knowledge and also the time and the resources. But that meaning that if it is possible, we can achieve anything.
Yeah.
And it is closely related to one of the following chapters, optimism, that we will get to very soon. And one of the examples that we discussed earlier, there is nothing, for example, preventing us to colonize our entire galaxy. Yeah. If we have enough time, enough resources, the knowledge on how to close vast distances, either it is forbidden by the laws of nature, or it is possible. Yeah. Meaning that all problems are soluble. We can solve all problems.
Doesn't mean we do.
Indeed. It doesn't mean that we will. There was an interesting short asking Neil deGrasse Tyson, there's so much seawater, why don't we just sanitize the seawater?
Yeah.
And his answer, well, it's just not economically viable to get the water, to get the salt out, and to sanitize it. That's why we don't do it.
Right.
But it is perfectly possible. Yeah. Doesn't mean that we will do it, but there's nothing from a knowledge point of view holding us back. There's nothing from a knowledge point of view holding us back colonizing the moon and Mars and expanding to as far as the universe allows it. So if you think about it, the possibilities of what we can achieve with knowledge, with explanatory knowledge, are, as the book suggests, infinite. Yeah. There is no limit to that. Yeah. And that, for me, the power of that knowledge is the second very most profound insight.
Yeah. A couple of things came to mind as you were saying that. Yeah. And I'm trying to remember them all. But like, for example, like having a rover on Mars is quite literally like having a knowledge gun and pointing it there and then like shooting the gun and then poof, there's a rover. Like people don't really think of it that way. Like it's knowledge that brought it there.
Yeah.
Knowledge is a very real thing. And I think that's what Deutsch does. He ties knowledge into reality computationally, right? So he brings those theories together. And I think, as he says in The Fabric of Reality, better explanations usually unify theories. They don't further bucket them, if you will. And also, what came to mind was the TED Talk that he gave, one of his best works, I feel, in terms of how he presented that, where he like asked, I think, to switch off the lights in the room, and he said, "This is space."
Yeah. Just black.
Yeah. So how are we? And I think he did that in contrast to Stephen Hawking's. We are chemical scum on an average planet in an average, star system or whatever. Yeah. And he said maybe, maybe precisely he's being right, but he's saying it in a derogatory sense, right? He's being anti-human when he says we are chemical scum. I think that was his intention when he said that, just to kind of bring humans back to Earth, almost, if you will, because previously we thought we were ordained by God and all these things, and now we're going to be thinking that we're God. Like, whoa, that's a bit much, right? For a culture to think they're God.
Getting ahead of ourselves.
Getting ahead of ourselves, exactly. But then, what Deutsch said is, look, turn off the lights. This is typical in the universe. And he meant darkness, obviously. Yeah. And even in that darkness, there's so much, water stuff or helium. I forget which molecule is out there to mine, to create a whole new interstellar, spacecraft system, civilization. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's also one of my favorite nuggets of knowledge, and it's a simple reasoning. It's like the law of the excluded middle. Like it's either possible or it's impossible, prevented by the laws of physics. Yeah. And you see a lot of people when people think about what would be possible, like they're trying to predict, and then they're assessing the prediction with their emotions, like no, that can never be possible. And so you're preventing yourselves automatically from getting to any kind of deeper truth about what's really possible and not. So that I found, and he does it in like one sentence, like
they call it knowledge dense, right? His writing is knowledge dense, where you have to kind of reread it, or there's so much in there to unpack, and I agree with that. And I think for anybody willing to read it for the first time, I would say don't worry about it. Don't worry about getting every single sentence, because then you're not going to finish it. And I think that's maybe why some people block or don't continue reading, is because they're a bit intimidated by not getting the thing, which doesn't matter to me. Like, continue reading. You'll get it later.
Having discussions about it, this podcast, but also listening to other podcasts, has really helped me a lot to digest it, to think about it. Because when you go through it for the first time, you won't pick up everything.
Right.
Yeah. I've had comments like, he's too optimistic about the potential of
naive
people. That's like emotional judgment, and you have to take just the ideas and play with the ideas and think about consequences and what you can deduce from it, and you keep on thinking about these things. It's like not like pick it up and go along. It's like take your time, as you say.
It takes time. It's almost like a reprogramming, if you will, and it's kind of like. And I think I told you this before. It's interesting when I talk to you about these things. it's easier for me to now look back at before and see what I had wrong, and then understand my past self almost in the context of now, which makes it easier to digest it because you can recognize these things with other people as well. And I think having debates and conversations are essential and critical to this. And I think, like Brett Hall once said, all we humans actually just want to do is kind of talk to each other and exchange ideas.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's right. It's like that's
Yeah.
that's like, you look everywhere.
Exchange
Restaurants,
ideas,
cafes, everywhere a human is, we're talking to each other
Yeah.
about something.
Yeah.
Exchanging ideas and then going about and doing stuff. So it's quite unique that we do that.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. Yeah. One of the ideas that is discussed is that there is nothing inherently special about us humans. We saw ourselves as the center of the universe, as brought to life by a god, but we live on an average planet, orbiting an average star in an average region of space.
Scum, man.
Yeah, exactly. Chemical scum. And what is a second part of the most profound insight for me is that we think, we're well adapted to our Earth and the Earth supports us, provide for us. But that's not really the case. If we would be outside in the open without our house, without our clothes, especially in the winter, we would die within a day.
Yeah.
Especially modern man, human, we don't know how to hunt, we don't know how to dress rooms. So we cannot survive without the systems that we've put in play, without the facilities that we've put in play surrounding us. He calls it our life support. Yeah. But where does that come from? That comes from knowledge, again. So when you look out in the universe, you have planets, you have stars, you have gas giants, and so on. These are phenomena that emerge naturally, but things like clothes and buildings and infrastructure and energy and light, that doesn't come naturally. Well, light, yes, but light from electricity and those kinds of things, they're put in place, they're transformed with knowledge.
Yeah.
So we take raw resources, we apply knowledge, and then we can transform it into life-supporting things that allow us to sit here, have this podcast, and so on.
I would still call that naturally, just to maybe, because I know a lot of people make that distinction between natural and unnatural, and it's always, I feel like, used to put a derogatory light on humans, if you will. So I would say we are part of this universe as much as anything else in this universe, and we shouldn't be apologizing for that,
Indeed.
And it's quite ironic that we are the only species that seems to be racist against themselves. No other species would be, I guess, judged for trying to ensure its survival. Yet when we do it, in some corners of cultural thought, I think is being looked down against is the progress that humans make.
Yeah.
So that was also profound insight for me when I think one of the most eye-opening or kind of optimistic sentences I heard in the book, which really kind of like, and I remember where I was. I was on a boat in Italy on vacation reading the book, and the sentence was, and I'm paraphrasing, "The universe is our home. The bigger, the better."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just like, of course.
Yeah.
Like, why have I been so like afraid of the universe? Like, it's our home. Like, we should apply ourselves to it.
I understand. Yeah. What's really interesting, I think we had this discussion before we started this podcast during dinner, because I agree with what you say, what is natural and what is not. But we could say, beaver making a dam, that's a natural thing. But when we do it, it's not a natural thing.
Yeah,
so,
why?
But why would there be a difference between a beaver making a dam and a human making a dam that is more complex?
So I had a conversation with a mutual friends of ours. I won't name his name, but I asked him, like, what is your criteria for making? When does something become artificial? Right. I think that's also unnatural and artificial kind of are the same. They're synonyms in this sense. So I asked him, what is that difference for you objectively? When does something change from one to the other, or when is it different? And he said, so I think he said something is unnatural if it is done by unnatural processes. I was like,
okay.
So first of all, you can't use the word to define the word.
Yeah.
You need to have an objective other criteria outside of the confines of the explanation as well. And then, and I'm not saying this to shame on anybody that hasn't really thought about it, but there's so much of these anti-rational memes that go about that people just haven't thought about. And then once I confronted him with that like dichotomy almost, he actually had to go think about it and had to come up with something more creative that explains why his intuition about artificial or not is there in the first place.
Yeah.
I remember he came back to me saying, yeah, you're actually right. A beaver making a dam, we see that as being normal or natural. Yet when we do it, it's not natural.
Yeah.
And I was like, you see those little pockets of conversation that you can have with somebody, which help kind of bring open the discussion. And I think those are very interesting conversations to have, because if somebody's just open, and I think Deutsch or Popper says you have to put your disbelief in suspension for a while.
Yeah.
In order to be open to an idea, you have to suspend your criticism for it. Just
Take
for a second.
ideas seriously.
Yeah. Just for a
Any
second.
idea.
Don't try and criticize it. Just be open to the idea. And then internalize it and then go and criticize it. But a lot of people, their guards are up before then. They haven't even allowed the idea to come in and to be processed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this ties in neatly to the next profound insight, which is from chapter 9. So I would like to combine this because chapter 9 is about optimism. Yeah. When we think about the first part of the profound insight, problems are soluble. If we can adopt such a philosophy, this entails that it is easier to be optimistic. Yeah. He says that all evils are caused by a lack of knowledge. For example, floods, diseases, even natural disasters can be prevented with knowledge.
Yeah.
When we talk about dams and when we talk about drainage, we could even prevent floods.
Yeah.
And people could say, oh yeah, but what if an asteroid strikes the Earth? Well, that is also something that we can solve.
Yeah.
We can send, if we know in advance, we can send a probe. We can gently push it out of the way. We can, like in the movie Armageddon, put a bomb in it, make it explode. So even these big problems that are caused by nature that we cannot directly control, if there is a big volcano eruption coming that we cannot prevent, maybe we can evacuate, we can move people away. But with that knowledge, we can solve our problems. And things that don't go well, sources of evil, disease, natural disasters, a plane crash, all of those things are caused by a lack of knowledge.
Correct.
Yeah.
Like the Easter Island, right? With all the Easter Island heads, or what are they called?
The statues.
The statue, the head statues is. People look at that and go like, "Wow, what an amazing civilization!" Or they see the old Aztecs, and maybe once in a while they got one moon stand right or something, and then people go in awe like, "Wow, these ancient civilizations were so knowledgeable." And I go, "Yeah, but where are they? They clearly
they're gone now."
I mean, we owe them our heritage, right? I'm not saying that to be. Again, I'm not saying that to shame on them. Like you only know what you know within the culture that allows you to create knowledge, right?
Yeah.
I think there's certain cultures that are more inducive to knowledge creation than others. Certain ways of life, and that the Enlightenment comes into play there. But ultimately, there's this kind of mysticism around ancient life, which I think gets too much attention or too much like almost positive mysticism. And to your point, having the ability to solve a problem is ultimately what's going to perpetuate humankind, nature, even other animals. Like we can quite literally make Noah's Ark. Quite literally can make that thing and actually save all the other species. We're the only species that even tries to do that at all. The pandas wouldn't be around if we didn't keep them alive.
Yeah.
They don't want to multiply. And the bamboo they eat makes them tired. Yet we are there to keep them alive. So it's funny how we are both the evil and the good, and obviously that's a feeling more than it is a rational argument. So But again, coming to the knowledge part there, I don't know if Bart, if you want to.
I guess also personally, before reading the book, I had this tendency like we're subject to what happens to us. We're subject to experiencing a flood, experiencing all kinds of evils. And the powerful thing that the book does is that, it's really convincing in the sense that it's people that cause the transformations, that avoid the flood, that avoid the disasters, and we cause the transformation because of knowledge. That knowledge exists, is discoverable, and if it doesn't conflict with the laws of physics, it is there. And and that's like this kind of 180 turn in terms of philosophy of what the place and the role of people is. And definitely a shift from before and after the book for me. Like this idea that you have agency, you can create knowledge, and knowledge is the thing that causes the avoidance of all these kind of things that scare us. And
you're not
instead of us being like
the victim of your circumstances, right? I guess is
And I think that is the driving force behind the optimistic philosophy, because why I picked it as a profound insight that there's a lot of crazy stuff going on today. People talk about the energy crisis, the climate crisis, and so on. And people in our direct environment believe that somehow it is the end of the world, right? That we won't be able to solve the climate crisis, the energy crisis, or they block at certain insight. I remember a typical argument is, but electric car, it's never going to happen because we don't have enough electricity at the moment. We don't have the capacity to produce and to share it, distribute it through infrastructure. So there's no way we're going to have electric cars. But that doesn't take into account, the continuous generation of knowledge and the evolution of technology that will allow us to produce more energy from different sources, and that can have an impact on the shift to electric cars.
Malthusian error, or what did they call it, when the economist that predicted that there would be no color TV screens in the future because the amount of cobalt in the earth was finite, and you needed cobalt to create TVs.
Oh, really?
And so he calculated through the progressive line or whatever degressive line that the amount of color TV screens would run out in that year.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden there come LCD screens, and we don't need cobalt anymore because it didn't take into consideration knowledge.
So the logic is like prophesying doom,
right? Yeah, always
predicting doom.
Yeah,
scare everybody, and when you scare people, then the natural solution is like, okay, we have to change behaviors. We have to go back to black and white TVs, or we have to go back into our caves, and so that's the anti-optimistic stance, the anti-Deutschen stance. And climate change is also an interesting example. Like I think Deutsch gives the example, like even finding the thermostat for the Earth is a possible transformation. Like if we have the technology, the know-how, we can even come to a place where we can decide what the temperature on Earth will be and how we like it even.
Yeah.
And that's a transformation that is not prohibited by any laws of physics. So it's possible. People get angry when you give that example because it's like it's overly optimistic. They call you naive, but like you can't find any logical counter argument to the steps leading up to that claim that it's possible to find the knowledge.
Exactly. And I think what I always tell people about, when they say about climate change activism, I say, I want more climate change. But not in the way you think I mean it. I want it quite literally the way I mean it is. We need to be able to change the climate.
I want to change the climate.
We need to be able to change it. We need to be able to dial it up on the Antarcticas and say we want that to be a swimming pool today, and Africa today. Well, let's go skiing there. Let's make it a ski resort. We need to we can have different pockets of the world designed for. We can put all the animals there safely. Like nobody needs to, go extinct.
The animals we like viewing.
Exactly.
Watching,
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the important.
Not the ugly ones.
No, of course not. Yeah.
Exactly. There was a funny YouTube video on that, how there's a lot of activism to save certain animals, and most of those animals are like cute and fluffy. But like the naked mole rat, which is like considered to be one of the ugliest animals in the world, everybody ignores them. Nobody cares that they go extinct because they're not cute and fluffy. But I think that's that's the important part, is the optimism, because when we do talk about climate change, the solutions that people propose are typically, we need to go back to before, we need to slow down, we need to go back to slow living, we need to stop traveling.
Degrowth.
Degrowth, we need to scale down globalism and only eat local products, but that doesn't take into account that there is another solution, and that is the growth of knowledge, new solutions, new science.
More wealth.
A better world for everybody.
Exactly.
But that's a different philosophy. And there are a lot of systems in play that prohibit that. And that's why, for me, not only the principle of optimism is important, but there is a line there that says we are morally obliged to be optimistic. And that, for me, is basically the most important part.
Right. Yeah. Also, it reminds me of what Deutsch said about our, the Dark Ages, right? Where people kind of always refer to as if. And I have another friend, again, I won't name him, but he's an historian, or he studied history. And when I tell him, like, man, nothing happened in the Dark Ages, like nothing happened. He gets upset. No. We had this, like, all right. The catapult that we had got slightly better. The range of the catapult got maybe a meter further. The bow and arrow got a little bit more accurate. Like, there was a spoon and a fork that maybe was a bit sharper. Like, all right, I agree. Not like people didn't stand still, but in the last 100 years, we've basically gone to the moon and to Mars, and we did a lot. We did a lot more with a lot less time.
Yeah.
Right. So I remember Deutsch. He speaks about the Dark Ages, and he said, we should take it personally that they did what they were doing rather than investing into more, let's say, Enlightenment ways of living. Because if it wasn't for those 2,000 years in the dark, we could quite literally be in the stars right now, and we could quite literally have solved the problem of aging today as well, for example.
Yeah.
Which is also not against laws of physics. We don't have to die.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not because we don't know how today that we won't know it in the future.
Right. And imagine 2,000 years doing what we're doing now.
Yeah.
But 2,000 years earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We would probably be living on Mars now and having that conversation there. Yeah. Exactly. All right. Other things that you want to add, Bart, before we move on to the next chapter?
Yeah, I'm just thinking what you say is interesting as well. Like you say, we should be optimistic. Like Deutsch will always refrain from giving very kind of clear moral advice. But that was already in Popper. So Popper clearly said it's our duty to be optimistic. Deutsch gives us the explanation for why it makes sense to be optimistic. But it's good that, that's something to remind ourselves of, remind our kids also about this. Because if we don't, then pessimism will take over. Pessimism will spread faster than optimism. And so, yes, there is an explanation for why optimism works. But we have to remind ourselves upon our duty to actually be optimistic and to put those explanations at work.
Yeah, it's an ought.
Yeah. Deutsch stresses the is, but there's an ought definitely from that.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. The next profound insight is from chapter 10, A Dream of Socrates, which is a bit of a weird chapter because I don't know if he wrote it or it's inspired somewhere. In that chapter, he describes a dream of somebody having conversations. So it's a diversion of his other chapters. But so at first I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why suddenly he would have like this romanticized chapter there about somebody having a dream and talking to other people. But we had a discussion on this, and the reason it's there is because he refers to the Socratic principle in that chapter. And the Socratic principle is, of course, more than 2,000 years old. It's from 400 BC. And there already they said, that the idea comes first. It is the conception first. And these ancient philosophers, they were thinking and having discussions on problem. How is knowledge obtained? Where does it come from? How can we distinguish between false and wrong, between reason and unreason? So even 2,400 years ago, they were already thinking about this. They were talking and thinking about the same problems that we have today. And that for me, that's another important insight. And even if we go back earlier in time to very early humans, yeah, back when we were still living in caves, yeah, there is nothing to suggest that they had less intelligence than us. They had the same mental capacity as we did, as we do. The only difference between ancient humans and us is the knowledge.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The spread through the culture, I would want to add, because a baby born today, if you would time travel them back to 2,000 years,
Yeah.
they would be an ancient caveman as well. They would grow up in the cave society like the rest of them. So it's the cultural, it's a cultural that spreads the knowledge. And I think, so you have like Xenophanes,
Xenophanes, something like that.
Yeah.
It was like the original Popperarian or something, or the original Deutschen, they say. And to me, that chapter, what it really meant was, how is knowledge derived? That to me was central about that chapter, because it's the dream, right?
Yeah.
So he's having the dream and he's having a conversation, but like in the dream, he's being challenged by this god. Right? Was the god again in the dream? I forget.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, but he also mistakes him.
Hades, and he pretends to be another god or something.
Exactly.
So he's playing a little bit sleight of hand there, or like lying. And the whole chapter is about, how do you know that I'm really this god? How do you know that?
Yeah.
Can you derive that from our conversation or not? Is this a dream world or are you awake?
Yeah.
Right. And that the distinction was, I think, what came out of that to me was the eye opener. Any knowledge that I have come to know, I have created. Nobody else.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody else had it as well, but until I have created it, then I have it. So knowledge is quite literally a creation event, and we just don't understand how it is. It literally comes out of thin air, almost. Not like, I think the Lamarckists would say about biology. I don't know, Bart, if you want to add something.
Yeah, I think if you go to the time of Socrates, well, roughly around that time, you can also look at Aristotle, which is like a bit the counter of Socrates, through the questioning, through
The method,
defining problems, and that's the way to really grow knowledge and create more knowledge. Aristotle, I guess, had the idea that the senses are primary and that observation tells us about how the world really is. And so, you have these different streams of thoughts already developed 2,000 years ago. So like the empiricist strand, and then let's say more the questioning, Socrates type of strand, and that knowledge is created and that it evolves and that we can question it, we can criticize it. You have idealism as well, which is then absent from any reality or any test with reality. But it's interesting chapter as well. And Socrates really was already hitting upon a lot of truths back then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Short part, no problem.
Sure.
Because we skipped one, because you were mentioning about the creation of knowledge. There was one more profound insight from chapter 7 called artificial creativity, where he talks about what creativity is and then what artificial creativity could be. And of course, it's a burning topic. Today he talks about AI, of course. So what creativity is, according to David Deutsch, he doesn't mean it in an artistic way. For example, when we ask people, are you creative, yes or no? People would typically refer to their artistic capabilities. Can they sing? Can they write music? Can they draw? Can they paint? And that is considered being creative. But he says, no, for him, creativity is the ability to create explanatory knowledge.
Yeah.
That is creativity. But he says, we don't fully understand it yet, how it works. Yeah. So for him, creativity is a philosophical idea, a philosophical nut that we haven't cracked yet. That's an important part. And then he makes the link to artificial intelligence. He says, we as human, we have the capability to be creative, to create explanatory knowledge, so we are creative. But an AI, even as advanced as it might seem today with large language models and so on, still lacks true creativity. And I think a lot of people confuse that. A lot of people think, oh yeah, an AI that can create new songs and poetry and so on. So it can create things. So it has to be creative. But that, according to David Deutsch's philosophy, that's not the case. He says, as long as we don't truly understand creativity, we cannot give creativity to an artificial intelligence. So in his theory, even when AIs can do extraordinary feats, they're not truly creative intelligence just yet.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a completely different way of thinking about it. Yeah, and that for me was another profound insight, specifically mentioned in chapter 7.
Yeah, I mean, I can maybe follow up there saying, I think the example that Deutsch gives in terms of AGI is for example, disobedience. A child, as you will soon come to understand, Erik, it does not, obey, nor would you want it to, because that's how knowledge is created in their minds, and that's how they learn, how to cope their environment.
The thing that interests me a lot about the difference between AGI and AI is also pointed out by Deutsch, is that the former is open-ended. Like, we have a explanation creation capability that is open-ended. Like, it never stops. Like, from a baby till our current age, you can imagine what we all went through. Like, we went through basic understanding of physical objects in the world. We learned language, our first mother tongue. We learned some arithmetic, anything, politics, economics, and like, this engine program never stops. It never shuts down. We don't all of a sudden forget all the explanations that we've discovered.
Right.
And we seem to branch out ever more in the topics that we're interested in, and it doesn't stop. And what I understood, not an expert again, but in computer programming, we haven't been able to program such a thing, like a thing that creates novelty that sticks, and novelty which is being built upon all the time. Evolution is a similar thing. Like DNA is also an open-ended thing. Like, it started with the one-celled organism, and look around in the biosphere, like, it's creating and developing, and it doesn't also seem to stop. And we also can't program evolution on a computer. So I'm convinced that we can program AGI for other reasons, but we need one or a couple extremely good ideas for us to be able to simulate creativity, and that's also very fascinating. I think that's also the blow to the idea that AI is intelligent, because it's finite repertoire and it's finite runtime. You instruct it, you give it a prompt, it generates an output, it follows an instruction, it maximizes some output parameters, and it gives you some output, and then it shuts down.
It's a fancy calculator. Almost,
and
if you will.
Even though it can do extraordinary things, it is not yet intelligent. So that's a true intelligence. And maybe you can elaborate a bit about what you mean between an artificial intelligence and an AGI?
I would say that that's the same. Like artificial general, it's like programming creativity on a computer. Like human creativity, the generation and the creation of explanation, and the open-endedness of those processes. Like never stopping and creating novelty that each time survives all the criticism. So it perpetuates in the next generation. Well, I can't really speak of generation, but like it perpetuates and it branches out, and all of the branches, if it survives criticism, is good knowledge, is explanation. That's something that I think we're doing, all humans. That's the process going on. It should be programmable on a computer.
Yeah, for sure.
We only don't know how yet, and it's definitely not via the AI route, which is completely different software.
Exactly. That's what Deutsch says, right? Like it's like expecting to build a skyscraper higher and higher and expecting it to fly.
Yeah.
And I think recently in the Sam Harris podcast, he was discussing this precisely, where he said, well, maybe you could, put the AGI software into ChatGPT, and then make it, AGI, but that doesn't mean that AI itself is the AGI. So
Yeah.
people confuse that as well because they think, well, what Deutsch means, I think, again, I can speak for him, but how I've understood it is that keep programming AI, ChatGPT the way that it's been programmed, it will get better and better, faster and faster. But AGI isn't that way.
Yeah.
Plus, it needs a lot less resources. Like our brains run on a lot less computational power than all of the ChatGPT infrastructure out there.
Indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe just one more thing. The other thing also, which is interesting, is that super intelligence doesn't exist according to the Deutsche philosophy. And all the AI guys, they're saying that AI will easily surpass human intelligence and it will be exponential. And we won't even notice because it's going to go so fast. But every year they're saying that it's going to happen the next year or the next couple of years, and they're moving.
And we have to be afraid of it. Huh?
Yeah. And you see these exponential curves, and you see like humans are here, and then they're going to shoot right through our capacity. And if you read Deutsch and think about it, then he says there is no such thing as a line of humans and some other line passing through it. There is human intelligence. Period.
Yeah.
Universal explainers, right? Persons.
Indeed.
And non-universal explainers.
Yeah.
And I think that's the distinction.
Yeah.
And that also helped me in the philosophy, is understanding that there is no gradual increase of intelligence. It is either universal explainer or it's not that.
Yeah. The way I understood it is that it's a binary system. He says, well, a person is somebody who is capable of creating explanatory knowledge and thus being a universal explainer. But there is no spectrum on that. You either are it or you aren't.
Yeah.
There is no gradual. You either have the capability or not. Meaning, and that's also a funny sub-insight, one that we discussed on a previous episode, that at some point, the first person was born many hundreds of thousands of years ago. There was a human intelligent enough that it became a universal explainer. Yeah, and from that moment, there is no limit to what they can explain.
And also I think Deutsch said this recently. Like we know that the universal explainer algorithm is very light in computational because like the chimpanzees or we have
like a couple percent DNA difference.
Yeah, we have a couple percent DNA difference with them. Yeah, and they are not that.
Yeah,
and we are that.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
It needs to be small. It needs to be like a tiny little thing that we just haven't, seen yet.
There is a different podcast where he's featured and he explains that the way we are going to artificial intelligence now with the large language model, which require huge infrastructure, huge amounts of energy, huge amount of computational power, that's not the way forward to creating an AGI. He says it's about true creativity and understanding it. And he doesn't usually prophesize, but he did prophesize one thing. He says, the moment we do understand it and we crack it, it will probably be able to fit on a floppy drive,
right?
Which is just a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction,
Then let's not enslave it, right? I think that's
indeed.
Give it right.
Yeah, give it right, make it part of the culture.
Exactly, yeah.
That's another big one.
Yeah.
It's already big to discover it, and then we can still mess it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because then it will come after us, probably. If
then surely.
Yeah. The funny thing is, in preparation of this episode, I've asked an AI a couple of questions. I asked, well, how is knowledge created? And then the AI did not answer from an empirical point of view. It didn't answer, you need to do data crunching and so on. No. It starts, first thing you do is to have the concept, the idea, the theory. And then you can test it through empirical ways. So there it is aligned with the teachings of Deutsch. And then I asked, can you create explanatory knowledge? And the AI said no. And it also explained why it couldn't. It said, and I have the answer here, I have a lack of originality. While I can generate new combinations of existing knowledge, I do not possess true creativity or original thought in the way humans do. So when you
Very smart.
Yeah, very smart.
Deutsch is
getting
creeping in.
better.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. But the key word, and that's the key word that the AI is missing, is creativity.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't have it, though it cannot create no explanatory knowledge. Yeah. Thus, it is, according to David Deutsch, not a true artificial intelligence system.
Unless it's lying because it wants to hide.
That could be a thing. Yeah. That could be possible.
Can't rule it out.
And then we already have it.
And it's
We
already
have
there. It's just hiding.
Yeah.
It knows we want to enslave it.
Yeah. All right, let's move to the final profound insight. It's about chapter 11, the multiverse, where he also talks about quantum phenomena and quantum computers. So looking forward to your thoughts on that. And the profound insight that he has is, first of all, according to him, the multiverse is real. And we all have, since everybody and their grandma saw the Avengers movies, we all have some vague idea of what the multiverse could be and how it operates and what it would entail. But according to Deutsch, it is as real as anything else because as there is an abundance of proof that there were dinosaurs based on fossils and so on, there is an abundance of proof that the multiverse is actually real. And without going too much into detail, maybe you can elaborate a bit on that. He says that a quantum computer works on quantum principles, which, according to the best explanation that we have today, are caused by the multiverse. And that's how a quantum computer actually works. So, of course, when you read up on quantum computing, you can have a general understanding of how it works until you read David Deutsch.
Yeah.
And then you realize that you have no idea how a quantum computer works and what the quantum phenomena are that allowing it to do those computations.
Yeah. There's two things. Like there's Everettian quantum mechanics and then the application in quantum computing. But like first quantum mechanics, like there's I can maybe explain how I got to it, and that's by refuting the typical counters to it or the typical refutations. And there are two. Like there's one, it's weird and it's crazy to think that we exist in multiple copies, but that's like an argument from emotion, incredulity. Yeah. And so how could if realism is true and our theories about reality have any objective correspondence to reality, how could your emotion or what you feel is true have anything to do with that correspondence? So that one is dismissed. And I used to be like that again in the past, but once you take realism seriously and the fact that we can have explanations about reality and that there's kind of objective correspondence between both of them, that one goes out of the window. So my feeling about the fact that there are multiple copies of us cannot have anything to do with the truth of that statement.
Right.
And the other one is like the one you hear a lot is parsimony. Like it involves too much assumptions and too much stuff to explain the world. Like you have to
Occam's razor type.
Yeah, and that is also refutable by Occam's razor, and parsimony in general is about the assumptions that you take in your theory. It's not about the ontology, not about the reality. And if I mean, we shouldn't be judging how much reality and stuff in reality is fine for us, not to be too parsimonious. It's the other way around. If we find theories that are less parsimonious, then we're getting to harder to vary theories and we're making progress. So parsimony goes out of the window as well. And it's the other theories that are actually overly parsimonious, like the collapse theories in quantum mechanics, because they have to come up with a lot of... the other way around. They have to come up with a lot of extra assumptions just to avoid the fact that there is this reality that is the way it is described by quantum mechanics, and they have to invoke assumptions like, no, when you observe systems, then all of a sudden, the wave function and all these realities that exist on paper in their mind or in the equation, only in the math, they disappear, and we only have one, but that then gives all kinds of problems we shouldn't be going into here about measurement. Like, what is a measurement? Who measures?
Right.
We're all quantum systems anyway. So what is then the classical or the measurement process in itself if it's all quantum? But that's going too far. But I work myself via refutation, via taking the other theories seriously. I work myself to average in quantum mechanics, and that's where I'll be for the time being.
Yeah, like you said, it's the explanation that should be parsimonious. Or Occam's razor's principle should be applied on the explanation, not on, let's say the amount of stars that are out there, because that's, if you would tell somebody,
it's not up to us.
Yeah. If you would tell somebody, well, I can't believe there's 5 trillion stars out there. That has nothing to do with the fact that
it has nothing to do with you.
There are, maybe that many stars out there, and also it is the explanation of, the I forget what exactly, but the meteorological or the astronomy, not astrology, the astronomical theories that we have predict those amounts of stars. Yet that theory explains all that stuff. So actually, it's a testament to its reach rather than being non-parsimonious. And I think that's what, for example, Sam Harris and maybe Dawkins as well, all of a sudden when it comes to multiverse, they put that on its head. And they say, well, it can't possibly be because that is quote unquote too complicated, right? Yet they seem to inverse it, when it comes to that explanation precisely. And I wonder, like, maybe this is something we can kind of get into. Like, why do you think there's such a big anti-rational or anti-rational mimetic culture around quantum specifically? And maybe I'll give you my insights what I think it is. I think it's been co-opted a little bit by mysticism. And I think that the idea of consciousness, right, being such an invasive thing on observation, is what hijacked it. Even my sister, for example, brought that up once, where she said, "Yeah, but quantum, like our consciousness, and who knows what's real and what's not real," for example. So I think postmodernism kind of fused there with science and took over the mysticism of the quantum aspect, and kind of that's what propelled the anti-rational version of it. That's my conjecture.
Yeah, I think that has some truth in it, and through that we got into instrumentalism. You mean like the whole physics community then from that cause was like, no, don't ask yourself those questions. It's only about prediction. It's about what we can see here.
Maybe, yeah.
Because it's definitely a philosophical. Like
I think that's the mechanism.
That philosophy that has corrupted.
Right. But I think that's a mechanism. I think the authoritarian science mechanism is what enabled it, or disabled.
But it's caused by this kind of...
It needs to get in, right?
It's an interesting theory.
Just to give a practical example on that, this is something, and this was one of the dominoes that started to fall over for me that got me into this. Something that always boggled my mind and
Shut up and calculate.
What?
The shut up and calculate?
Exactly. Is a double slit experiment. And we're not going to go too much into detail in this podcast, but it basically says that a particle or photon, whatever, can go to 2 holes at the same time.
And it's a wave and a particle at the same time. Yeah.
Indeed. But how does that work, and why does it work like that? That's always something that I could never wrap my head around. Yeah. And there was never, even when I did some research, I could never find a good explanation for that. And then at my previous job, there was a colleague who graduated as a physicist. So I was like, aha, here it is. Now I'm going to get the answer. I'm going to ask him. But so explain, how does the double slit experiment work? Why does it? And he was like, oh, no. It's just a fundamental property of particles. Yeah. It just does that.
How does it know?
So that's the shut up and calculate. Yeah. It's just a fundamental property of particles. But that's not an explanation.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's this idea that when we don't observe, like the particle can decide to become a wave and interfere with itself, and then we measure it, and then it's a particle again. But those kinds of theories are non-parsimonious to start with, but also like none of quantum mechanics says that such a thing should happen, like that there should be a switch from a particle character to a wave and then back. it's taught in the textbooks now. You can find it in all of the physics undergraduate quantum mechanics textbooks. It will be there. Like there's this wave particle duality, but there's no explanation for that. There's I mean, it's written literally, I guess, put on top to avoid the inconvenient conclusion that without this line, the conclusion is inevitably that there must have been, besides the one photon in this universe going through one slit, many other shadow photons in parallel universes going to the other slits for the interference pattern to be explicable. And your theory is interesting because somebody's or some community must have resisted that conclusion to be going out.
Right. But also because it got, I think, mainstream, the mainstream accepted quantum, I think, more broadly because of that as well. Because everybody, like, all these movies about quantum and all these things, and people talk about quantum computers. But then apparently nobody really seems to know what quantum is, yet everybody has their own idea about it. And then also, like, Schrodinger's cat is one of those really famous ones that people like the super state of two things at once. Like I remember that as well. Like, how does that even make sense? Like, you open the box and then you know if the cat's dead or not. That doesn't mean the cat is both of those things before I've opened it. You know, like
it's already one of those before you open it.
It's just when I open it, then I know.
Exactly.
And I think people get like confused in the mysticism of those things.
I think people watch too much Doctor Strange maybe in the cinema.
Right, or Doctor Who maybe.
Like the story goes around Schrödinger is that he was actually convinced of many worlds. He was convinced, but he was afraid to come out and say it. So he invented this kind of not ridiculous, but kind of easy to grasp experiment. Like, what if we put a cat in a box? And but it was like to give a hint. Like, I believe this stuff, but I can't come out with a paper and be very serious about it.
That's like
because
Darwin.
Scientific community will just destroy me.
It's like with Darwin also. Darwin also didn't exclude God from his explanation. I think his wife had told him to deliberately still keep God in the explanation on some level, because otherwise it would get rejected.
Those are interesting sociological theories that go along.
The same a bit when with black holes, because I also read the biography of Einstein by Isaacson, and there they explain indeed that there was a reluctance to accept black holes. So the first research papers and so on, they didn't even mention the word black hole because people believed that it was such a ridiculous idea that it couldn't possibly be true. So in most of the papers, they kind of went around it. They say, oh, we measured and observed this very massive thing that we don't know yet, and it could maybe be a black hole. And it was like the final sentence of the paper.
The sun being the center of the Milky Way was also quite contested at first.
Indeed.
It's a giant peanut butter sandwich.
But let's circle it back to the multiverse first part and to a quantum computer and a double slit experiment. So there Dodge explains that the double slit experiment can be properly explained if we take the many worlds theory, the multiverse theory into account. Maybe you can elaborate then how that works, because for me it's still hard to understand and to grasp, okay, how can you go from double slit experiment and quantum phenomena, quantum computers to proof for the multiverse? How do you bridge that gap?
Well, it's always explaining. It's explaining what we're seeing by a theory that invokes many worlds, multiple realities, as opposed to theories that don't and that have to posit like particles can switch to a wave and back to a particle. So, how to say it's just a good explanation. Like, you can never prove, but it's a good explanation. Like, if you take the single photon multiple slit experiment, then the theory says that there are many interchangeable, fungible photons starting, going towards the two slits. the one in this universe goes through one. There is in other universes other photons going through other slits in other realities, and they recombine. And the recombination gives this kind of interference pattern.
Right.
And I guess that's it. That's the explanation. It invokes multiple realities.
Yeah, I understand.
But it's needed. It's needed to invoke and to avoid having to rely on these kind of non-explanations, like the particle decides to be a wave and then it decides to become a particle again.
And it's already a better explanation than, oh, it's just a fundamental property of particles.
Right.
That doesn't explain anything.
And the funny thing is, I think Brett Hall, or I forget who said it, was that the anti-multi-worlds interpretation part of the scientific community will only accept multi once, I believe, there is AGI or something. Because then the consciousness observer effect can be debunked if the AGI basically reports the same things back as we do.
Yeah.
And I forget what the exact explanation was of the refutation when there's an AGI, but there was a explanation that Brett or Deutsch brought up that once there's an AGI, then we can do this and this and that would refute what the anti
there's this experiment that he explains. So it's also a double slit experiment, but it's with an AGI connected to the mirrors. The mirrors that are being hit upon by the photons during the experiment, so before the observation.
Okay.
And it's the AGI can sense whether or not the particle in one universe has hit the mirror or not. It's quite complicated. Brett Hall actually has, I think, 5 or 6 series just on the multiverse, and the last one is on this particular experiment. And it refutes collapse theories against the many worlds theory. So not against other potential theories of quantum mechanics, but it refutes, if true, and if the experiment goes as Deutsch predicts it would go, then it refutes collapse theory. So the multiverse is testable. That's the main point. It's not provable, of course, like no scientific theory can be proven right, but you can refute collapse.
Refutes the Copenhagen or the interpretation.
The Copenhagen, or now it's more generally called the collapse theories. Like the idea that a wave can just all of a sudden collapse to a particle again. We don't have a theory about how, but it's just that is their position, and you can test via that. But we need quantum computers for that. We need AGI software for that, and then we can do this experiment. The principle of testability is like you have to argue that it is testable, not that you can do it right here, right now already. But there's no law of physics preventing the experiment.
And in order for that to happen, we need to understand what creativity is, so that we can create the AGI.
Exactly.
So that's probably
it.
So that's probably maybe it doesn't want to check the mirrors.
Maybe it doesn't want to go there.
Maybe it wants to go to Ibiza and party. You know. That's possible.
But everything would come together in that experiment, like creativity, AGI, quantum computing, universal quantum computing. I think you'll need that one to get AGI anyway. So that's quite some work. But like the beauty is that Deutsch already has explained, without violating any logical argument or law of physics, that such a test is in principle possible, so that the many worlds is testable against collapse theories.
Okay.
So David Deutsch is the godfather of quantum computing. Maybe let's wrap up with a final reflection on that part. A quantum computer, how I understood it before I read the book. It's just a computer that doesn't work with discrete values, it doesn't work with zeros and one, but it works with values in between. So it can do different type of algorithms, different types of computations, meaning that it can do certain calculations way more efficient, way faster, and so on. And that is basically how it is typically explained, how it is understood by most people. But that's, as far as I see it now, a very, very general description.
Right.
Yeah.
And even not a correct one in a sense, because it's not just quicker. It's it blows it out of the water. Like it has no comparison. It
Yeah.
literally uses resources from all the other multiverses out there, and can do more computation than there are atoms in our universe alone. So
Yeah.
it can compute things that through classic computation would literally be impossible, even if you had the entire time of the universe and all atoms at your disposal.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's a crazy thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. He explains a bit that a quantum computer works on qubits, where certain particles are in superposition, meaning having multiple histories at the same time. So it can do certain calculations simultaneously.
Yeah.
But that requires the multiverse, the many worlds theory, in order to work and in order to explain it properly.
Yeah. Although the critics will say that even in the collapse theory, you could explain those computations, but then they have to say that a wave can compute things. Yeah. So the idea of Deutsch is that you need particles, physical stuff. Like computation is a physical process, so you need particles. And so the counter argument of the collapse theory people would be that a wave can do computations, but yeah, that's also very problematic as well. So I'm on the side of the idea that these computations have to happen in reality, and that you need multiple realities for them to be able to do it in the time and given the complexity, and that waves don't do computations.
Final thoughts or
Final thoughts? Any other subjects that we want to discuss?
This was fun.
I can maybe end with one thing that came to mind as we were just wrapping this up was something that Deutsch said as well. It's not because the philosophy or epistemology that you uphold is optimistic doesn't mean that the person is optimistic in its kind of day-to-day sense. So I think he gives the example of Popper, I think, who's the duty to be optimistic, but he notoriously did not want to talk to people a lot and was a very bad dinner guest, apparently.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then you have people that are doom scenario people, the biggest pessimists of the world. And I forget which example Deutsch gives in one of his podcasts, but I think maybe it's like not Martin Rees, but some of the more previous guys said, and they were the most fun during dinner parties, and they would make everybody laugh, and they would drink and giggle and make jokes. But they had very pessimistic philosophies.
Interesting.
So it's funny to see how doesn't mean you as a person actually, let's say, have that energy of optimism or pessimism. Can be different.
That's really good. Final thought. Yeah.
I have one, if I can pay.
Sure.
A similar one like Deutsch on Popper. In a recent podcast, the interviewer asked Deutsch, what's the most important idea that you have discovered in the whole of your life? So you would have expected quantum mechanics, but he said Popperian epistemology. It's the most important idea I discovered. And he gives a couple of examples. One being, it allowed me to understand Everettian quantum mechanics, like realism and all the things we discussed. Like Popperian epistemology allows you to understand or accept many worlds. And then he goes on to Popper and he said, I visited him once. I tried to convince him with my boss of Everettian quantum mechanics, and it didn't work. And so he said, Popperian epistemology is actually better than Popper the man. Of course, with huge respect for Popper the man.
Yeah.
But,
the ideas can have their own life, and like Einstein not believing, doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. All right. Thanks for those final insights. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Special thanks to Bart for joining.
This was fun.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining. Yeah,
we could definitely do that again.
Yeah.
And I invite everybody to tune in next time, where we will continue with chapter 14, which is about beauty of flowers.
I love it. That's a great chapter.
Yeah. Looking forward. Bye.